Herpes. Most of you probably have it, including your grandparents. Now, a lot of the time when people think of herpes, they think of it as a sexually transmitted infection. And so I may have given you the impression that your grandparents are participating in risque extracurricular activities. But before you fully let your mind wander to places that you will never be able to unsee, let me explain a little bit more about herpes. Yes, there is a sexually transmitted form of herpes that can cause genital herpes, and this is typically caused by a specific herpes virus called the herpes simplex 2 virus. Although genital herpes can sometimes also be caused by the herpes simplex 1 virus. But the herpes simplex 1 virus typically causes cold sores on and around the mouth. And the majority of people have actually been exposed to and infected by the herpes simplex 1 virus, even if they've never had a cold sore. And this certainly doesn't have to be transmitted sexually. You could get this from sharing drinks or chapstick with someone that had a cold sore, or even a little kid could get it from kisses from an infected parent that didn't know a cold sore was about to emerge. But there's also another infection called shingles. And shingles is a gnarly, painful rash that results from the chickenpox virus. And the chickenpox virus actually belongs to the herpes family of viruses. And this is why I referenced your grandparents, because shingles typically affects older individuals, although it is increasing in younger people. And almost everyone has been exposed to the chickenpox virus in some form, whether it's naturally or through a vaccine. So today, we're going to discuss how chickenpox relates to shingles, and it's actually very fascinating how this virus stays inside your body. We'll also talk about why it's so nasty and painful, why it only affects one side of the body, and if somebody has shingles, can they then spread it to you and give you shingles? Also, does it matter whether you got chickenpox naturally the old-fashioned way versus getting vaccinated for chickenpox? It's going to be a blistering one. So let's get into the anatomical and pathological rudeness of this virus. So let's start with the basics. Shingles, which is also known as Herpes Zoster, is a viral infection that causes a painful, blistering rash on the skin. It's caused by the varicella zoster virus, which again is the virus that causes chickenpox. And so if you've ever had chickenpox, which most people born before the 1990s vaccine rollout have, then you've likely experienced that ridiculously itchy rash that was made up of multiple bumps or vesicles scattered over your entire body. And the chickenpox rash is actually quite a bit different than the shingles rash that we'll learn about in just a second. But here is the interesting thing. After you get over the symptoms of chickenpox and the rash resolves, the virus does not get eradicated from your body. It actually hides out in your body like a little dormant, jerk-faced viral volcano waiting for the right moment to erupt. But where does this virus actually hide out in your body? Well, after the initial chickenpox infection, the varicella zoster virus retreats into your nervous system, specifically into a structure called the dorsal root ganglion. And this is a small swelling or bulge in a sensory nerve root that is coming right off the dorsal aspect of your spinal cord. And the reason for the bulge or swelling is that it contains the cell bodies of sensory neurons. And the virus hangs out and remains dormant in this dorsal root ganglion, potentially for many years. And the fact that these are sensory neurons will be important in a second. But you have a dorsal root ganglion on both sides of the spinal cord and at every spinal level. So you have a right and left C7 dorsal root ganglion, a right and left T5 dorsal root ganglion. And those spinal levels will also be more important to understanding the location of the shingles rash in just a second. So what flips the switch and wakes this virus up? Well, let's fast forward 20, 30, or maybe even 50 years into the future after the initial chickenpox infection. Something weakens your immune system, allowing the virus to reactivate and travel down a sensory nerve to eventually erupt on the skin. Now, one of the most common triggers of this is age. Your immune system naturally slows down as we age, which is why shingles could be referred to as the old person's herpes, as about half of the cases hit people over 60. But that's changing a little bit as the number of younger people getting shingles is increasing. And this is potentially thought to be due to increased stress and possibly the decline of general health in the younger generation. But other things could also weaken the immune system and influence the development of shingles, such as cancer treatments, HIV, organ transplants, or even autoimmune disease can give the virus an opening to reactivate. Now, I'm assuming that most of you watching this video are interested in your health. And so let me quickly talk about an awesome tool that can give you many incredible health insights, and that is the Hume Health Body Pod. This is not just some bathroom scale. is a clinical grade body analyzer that gives you much more information than just your weight. The BodyPod uses bioelectrical impedance analysis to scan and deliver over 45 metrics. Things like skeletal muscle mass, body fat percentage, hydration levels, and metabolic age, to name a few. It even breaks that data down into regions, which helped me realize that I still have some mild imbalances between my left and right side. So you could definitely use this to address these muscular imbalances. Now, admittedly, I have been skeptical about at-home devices that claim they're 98% accurate like the BodyPod does. But I had body composition tests done at a lab around the same time that I started using the BodyPod, and the results were nearly the same. So I've been using it for weeks now, and I've been logging consistent weigh-ins, syncing my sleep and workouts, and even setting milestone goals that I can track in the app. And as a bonus, the BodyPod is HSA and FSA eligible. So if you want to know more about your own anatomy, click the link in the description to check out the BodyPod and use our coupon code TheAnatomyLab to get 20% off. Plus, that 20% discount also stacks on top of the current online sale for up to 50% off. So go ahead and start optimizing your health routine today. And now, let's get back to shingles. So what about vaccination status? Some of you got chickenpox naturally, the old-fashioned way, and some of you got the vaccine. I taught high school anatomy and physiology for a year back in 2015, and I remember when we were talking about viruses and immunity, and I asked the students, remember when you guys all got chickenpox? And over half the class looked at me like, what are you talking about? I don't even know what chickenpox is. And then I remembered I was talking to a much younger group of individuals. And so then I asked, by a show of hands, how many of you have actually had chickenpox before? And only a few in the class raised their hand, because the majority of the students had been vaccinated, so they had never experienced the actual rash. And the reason why this is important or worth noting is that if you got chickenpox naturally, you actually do have a higher risk of developing shingles because you were infected with a live, active virus, leading to a higher viral load. Those that were vaccinated got what's called a live attenuated virus, which is a weakened virus that's designed to just develop an immune response, typically without severe symptoms. And because it's a weakened virus, it's less likely to reactivate and become a problem as shingles later on in life. Now, a common question that I'll get from patients that have shingles is, am I contagious? Can I give shingles to someone else? Well, sort of. Someone with shingles cannot give shingles to another person, because remember, shingles is the secondary infection after someone has had chickenpox or even possibly vaccinated for chickenpox. So I've never actually been worried about walking into a room with one of my patients with shingles and been worried that they're going to give me shingles because I already had chickenpox. I've likely got this virus in one of my dorsal root ganglia, and maybe one day it will try to reactivate and give me shingles due to my initial infection. But if someone has shingles and is around someone who has never had chickenpox or been vaccinated for chickenpox, that person could initially develop chickenpox from someone who has shingles. And I actually had a really interesting case with some pediatric patients a couple years ago. A mother came in with two of her kids, and she said they both have some weird bumps on their skin. And she was initially thinking it was some reaction to a pond that they were recently swimming in. But I looked at the few bumps that they did have, and I looked at the mother and I said, this actually looks like chickenpox, which was interesting because we don't actually see chickenpox all that often in the clinic anymore due to the vaccine. And so I asked her if the kids had been vaccinated for chickenpox, and she said yes, but they each only got one of the two vaccines, as the chickenpox vaccination protocol is a 2-vaccine deal spaced apart. And approximately 20% of children who receive just one dose of the vaccine may develop chickenpox infection after being exposed to the virus. And typically, it's a very mild case because they do have some immunity from the first vaccine, and this was the case with these two kids. But where did they get exposed? So I asked the mother if they'd been around any sick individuals or anyone that had had chickenpox. And she initially said no, but then she was like, well, their dad has had some weird rash on his arm and he refuses to go to the doctor. And I was like, what does the rash look like? And she said, well, I actually took a picture of it. And the picture of this rash on their dad's arm was a classic shingles rash. So essentially, the kids were exposed to the virus through their dad having shingles, and they hadn't quite developed full immunity to stop themselves from getting a mild chickenpox infection. Now finally, on to the symptoms. And this is where shingles earns its reputation. It usually starts with a prodrome phase, kind of a warning period before the rash actually shows up. You might feel tingling, itching, or burning pain in a specific area, most often on one side of your body over a very specific strip of skin. Some people will get headaches, fever, or fatigue, but then a rash erupts. Red patches that turn into fluid-filled blisters that crust over in 7 to 10 days. The pain can be intense, described as burning, stabbing, or this electric shock-like pain. And the pain might linger for weeks or months. But why can this rash be so painful? And why does it typically only affect one side of the body? Well, remember where the virus is hanging out dormant, in the dorsal root ganglion, which contain the cell bodies of sensory neurons. When the virus becomes active, it will start to replicate and travel down the sensory nerve, and this sensory nerve will terminate in the skin. And this is where the virus will cause the blistering rash and start to shed. And because it is affecting a nerve, this explains why it can be so painful and create that burning or stabbing type of pain. Now, like I previously mentioned, those sensory nerves go to and innervate a very specific area of the skin. And this is where dermatomes come into play. A dermatome is a specific area of skin supplied by a sensory nerve from a specific spinal level. And you can see from this illustration that we have mapped out all the dermatomes of the body. So let's say the virus was in your left L4 dorsal root ganglion. That means when the virus is active, the rash will show up and cause pain in that L4 dermatome on the left side of your body. Or if it was in the right T4 dorsal root ganglion, the rash would show up and cause pain in that T4 dermatome on the right side of your body. And it most often does affect the thoracic dermatomes. And this is why shingles got its name, because the name comes from the Latin word cingulum, which means belt or girdle. And when it affects a thoracic dorsal root ganglion, the rash kind of wraps around on one side of your torso like a belt. But I should mention that sometimes the virus doesn't hide out in a dorsal root ganglion that is associated with the spinal cord. Sometimes it can hide out in a ganglion in a cranial nerve called the trigeminal nerve. And the trigeminal nerve serves the skin of the face. And so sometimes people can have a shingles rash on one side of their face. And if it affects the branch of the trigeminal nerve that serves the eye, the ophthalmic division, this can be serious and someone will often need to be referred to ophthalmology, as this could affect vision if it's not treated properly. And speaking of treatment, how is shingles typically treated? Well, the mainstay is antiviral meds like acyclovir or valacyclovir. These work best if started within 72 hours of the rash appearing, shortening the outbreak and reducing the risk of post-herpetic neuralgia, which is nerve pain that can linger for weeks after the rash actually resolves. For pain management, over-the-counter options like ibuprofen or acetaminophen can help, but for tougher cases, stronger medications like gabapentin for nerve pain might be needed, especially in the case of post-herpetic neuralgia. And even sometimes cool compresses, calamine lotion, or oatmeal baths can soothe the rash. There is a shingles vaccine available that is often recommended for adults over 50. It's over 90% effective with 2 doses, spaced 2 to 6 months apart. And as of 2025, CDC data shows it's cutting cases significantly in vaccinated groups. And if you've had shingles before, you can still choose to get vaccinated to prevent round 2. Because yes, even when shingles resolves, just like with the initial chickenpox infection, your body still does not eradicate the virus, and it essentially retreats back into the dorsal root ganglion. So definitely not a fun rash to get, but hopefully this has given you enough interesting information to understand this non-sexually transmitted herpetic rash so that you can make your own informed decisions about treatment and prevention. So thanks for watching today's video, and we'll see you soon.